It's The Journey with drug and alcohol attorney Mark G. Astor.
All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of The Journey from Addiction to Recovery. If you have questions or comments while you're watching the show, please feel free to post them. You can follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn and all the other social media platforms. This is going to be a very moving show. I think that's the right word to use, moving. So my guest today is Alan Mednick. Alan is an advocate for individuals who are suffering from mental illness, and he comes from a parent's perspective. He lost his own daughter to suicide 7 years ago, lost a niece to suicide 3 years ago, and has a son who is dealing with anxiety and depression. And when I met Alan, I was so moved. I mean, and I'm really flattered that you wanted to come on the show. In fact, when I saw you at lunch, I said, I have to have you on the show because you're doing amazing work. And I know that you're trying to sort of turn your own personal tragedy, I think that maybe that's the right word, into something really positive. And I really have amazing respect for you, Alan. I don't know how you get out of bed every day and do what you do. I mean, you're inspirational. How's that? I think that's an understatement, but that's probably a good word. So thanks for coming on to talk about a very touchy, stigmatized topic.
Yes.
So
yes, it is.
Thank you. So let's get into it. So I know you live here in town, right?
Yeah, I live in Wellington.
You live in Wellington, so right here in South Florida with the rest of us.
Yes, I do.
So tell us how this all started. I mean, I know you lost your daughter, your niece. I mean, how?
So
share that with us.
When I was up in Massachusetts, living up there, and I got a call, and my daughter had taken her life at college. She was 19 years old. She was in upstate New York. And obviously that was something, you don't expect that. You don't expect you to lose your daughter. So it was a tough time, like you would expect. For about a year or two, I was in a deep isolation. Didn't want to talk, didn't want to do anything. And then I saw my son starting to go through some depression and anxiety, and we had to start getting him help. And a couple of years later, and I'm going through a real quick scenario here. My niece took her life in 2016, and the same thing. And she was actually in Maryland, brought down to a psychiatric hospital down here, and obviously things didn't work out in the hospital, and she took her life there. So basically, I had to start making changes for myself. And one of the things that I noticed was a lot of people, when they would call me and say, I'm sorry for your loss, this and that. One of the things that really got to me is a lot of these people had their own stories. And they would tell me about their brother that lost their life at 18, 16, whatever it was. And I've known these people for a long time. These were people that were in high power positions and very respected people, but they never talked about it. And
it's a taboo subject.
It's a tough subject, but again, it's like everything else out there. Unless you talk about it, unless the word gets out there, I'm not talking about going out and preaching or anything like that, but subjects come up. And if you don't talk about it, nothing's going to improve. And there's a lot of examples on that. So that's one of the reasons why I started getting more involved. Some of it was a personal issue. Some of it was treatment for myself. I joke with my wife all the time. I've said to her, if I don't do all this, we would be spending tens of thousands of dollars in medical costs because I would have to go to treatment all the time for this. But this is my treatment. This helps me out helping other people.
How's your wife doing? It had to be devastating for her.
It is. She's a strong person. She's a nurse. So she deals with tragedy a lot. Obviously inside, I'm sure it, eats her up at time to time, all the time. But she's been my backbone. So she's been very strong. And obviously we have our son that we're trying to help also. And he's been doing good since we've been down here.
Well, they say that when you lose a child, they say you don't get over it. You just sort of learn to live with it. Is that?
That's absolutely correct. And, and I'll tell you, I have had other people that I've lost in my life to suicide. I had a not best man, but a person in my wedding party when I got married. Several people I know. It never hit me until my daughter passed, the difference between suicide and a lot of other ways people go. Because suicide is preventable. There are signs for it. There are ways you could help people. And that's one of the things that people don't understand, that it basically is an illness. and it's just like cancer or anything else. But if you could, it can be treated.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's a conversation I have with parents. And like you, I'm even less of a clinician than you. And sometimes the struggle I have is getting both parents on the page. Right, one parent gets it, and the other parent says, why won't he or she just stop? Because obviously, a lot of the time, this mental illness is accompanied by some substance use.
Right.
They're like, why don't they just stop? And I'm like, well, from what I understand, it's a brain disease, right? If they could, they would. So somebody has to make this decision to get them into treatment, because they can't make it.
It's absolutely true. And that's the one issue that other people could do and help out. That's why there are programs out there. People have to just get more aware. And that's the stigma behind it, that we got to get out of the language. We got to get people more aware of what's going on out there. Because if people are understanding the signs, and I mean, the signs are basically, if someone is sleeping too much, and they're usually up all the time, if someone's in school and they're starting to fail or get to school late, if someone's drinking too much, all of a sudden taking drugs, if they're not eating a lot, just changes in them. Those are all different signs. They could be minor or they could be major. But if you just go up to someone and say, hey, are you okay? Is there something I could help you with? You ask the person straight out at a certain point. People in your situation, they think about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? It's not a problem to ask them that. The one thing that I know a lot of people are afraid of is if you say that word suicide, it's going to make the person think that you're going to give them an idea. Like, oh my God, the guy said suicide. That might be a good idea. It doesn't happen that way. People aren't influenced that much. There's a lot of different reasons why people get to that point. It's not one issue. So yeah, if people were more aware and helped out, other people can be helped by that.
Right. Do you? I mean, in your case, were there warning signs with your daughter and your niece?
So, yes, with both of them, there were warning signs. My daughter being up at college, she was under treatment, and she was on pretty high medication. She was diagnosed with PTSD. She was diagnosed also with bipolar. So the medication she was on was pretty strong. The thing about it is that she was 19. And at 19 years old, she's over that 18. So we don't have access to the medical records unless, she's willing to open them up. So that was one of the problems I had also, not understanding exactly what she was doing, what she was on at the time. We didn't find that out until after she passed.
I wonder, and I think back to, as you were talking, I was sort of having flashbacks to my own childhood, and I was saying, is it just that we become much more aware of, what sort of the whole mental health issue, or are kids of this generation just under so much more pressure? I mean, there's more anxiety from social media. I mean, the medication. I mean, is it just a different environment that we're living in today? I mean,
it's absolutely a different environment. As we talked about in the past, one of the things are when we were kids, we were out there playing all the time. We got all our anxiety out. There might have been pressure, but it didn't come along with you. You either got the pressure out with playing sports or whatever you were doing, and then the other part of it is it wasn't there. Once you were at school and something happened at school, it stayed at school. It didn't go with you. Now it's on Facebook, so it stays with you forever because, again, next year you're going to have that memory popping up. So it goes out to the whole world now, where it used to be in our lifetime where it would stay in that one containment. Now everybody's seeing what's going on. And it does create a lot of pressure, a lot of anxiety, a lot more kids worrying. The one thing that is amazing to me also, I read an article from a 1981 Wall Street, it was New York Times, and there was a news program on that night on ABC News, and it was about suicide and teenagers. And it said in the 5-year period, the suicide rate doubled.
That's crazy.
In 1981, we're about 40 years later, and nothing's changed. And actually, it's been getting worse. If you look at a lot of the articles that are out there, in Palm Beach County alone, there was an article, I think in the Centennial, about 2 weeks ago. In Palm Beach County, the suicide rate has gone up 25%. The one good thing about it, not for that, but also the suicide hotline, the crisis hotline, has increased also. So more people are calling to try and get help. So that's the good part of it, but obviously the bad part of it is the suicide rate has gone up. And that's what I talk about we have to get out there and talk about it. We got to get the stigma behind us, and more people just got to get out there and be aware of the situation and other people.
So tell us about your advocacy, because I know that that's like a big part of what you do, getting out there. And I know you were in DC, and I want to talk about that because you met with our mutual friend Ted Deutsch, who's just a terrific guy.
Yeah.
So tell me about what you know, because I know you're right there, like ground zero, trying to make a big difference.
Yeah. So again, a lot of what I do is to try and help people. A lot of it's for treatment for me too, because it helps me cope with things. But I got to tell you one thing. All right, so I don't do this. It's not my paying job, I would say. My paying job is with insurance. But when I go to all my networking meetings, when I go anywhere, I talk more about suicide prevention than I do about my paying job. And I notice that when I leave a meeting, I have 2 or 3 people at every meeting that come up to me and ask me questions, whether they're struggling, whether they have a loved one that's struggling, and it could be anywhere. It could be in the military, it could be personal school issues. You see it a lot, and you don't realize how many people out there are struggling. So the more I see this, the more I want to help, and the more I want to talk about it. On the plane back from Washington, D.C., I had my Out of the Darkness shirt on. I had 2 people, as I was walking to go to my seat, talk to me about it and say, we need more help. And people tell me that they lost a loved one. So the more people I talk to, the more you see there needs to be help out there. And that's why I advocate. That's why I'm trying to get more funding. Do you know that we're one of the top leading causes of death in this country, and yet we have the least amount of funding
For mental health.
for mental health? Florida ranks, depending on what you look at, is either 48th or 50th in the country for mental health services. This needs to change. And that's where I spoke with your friend there, Representative Deutsch, and he's a great guy, and I think he wants to help us make changes here. But we need more services for people. We need more funding to get the awareness out. The crisis hotline needs more funding for people that need it. We need to get those times down for people that call the suicide hotline to get down. I think they said it was like 60 seconds or whatever before someone picks up. We need to get that under 10 seconds. So there's a lot that needs to be done. A lot can be done.
Right. I mean, if somebody's calling because they're like, I'm suicidal. I mean, if they probably don't get an answer within 3 or 4 rings, they're hanging up.
I don't know the study on that one, but I would imagine so. People that are in crisis want the help immediately. They feel like they need it right then and there, and they don't want to wait for anybody.
Wow. So I saw your great photographs online from DC.
Yeah.
A place I lived for a year. It's a great town, especially when the weather's good.
I had a lot of fun up there. Did a lot of great things up there.
I was going to say, so what did you do up there? Because I know that, a large part of the trip was really for, to talk about what you're doing.
I was actually up there for 2 weeks.
Was that long?
I was 2 weeks. I went up there. I have a niece that lives in Baltimore, so I went up there. She did the NAMI walk on the Saturday, which she asked me to come with, so I did the NAMI walk.
We spoke at NAMI on Thursday, Audra and I.
Oh,
in Broward.
It's a phenomenal organization.
Yep, phenomenal.
Phenomenal. And we did the walk. Great walk they had there. And then from there on Sunday, I'm part of the ADL, Anti-Defamation League. So we were up there for the summit, met with some of the representatives up there for that. And then the following Sunday, I was there for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Advocacy Forum. And that was just unbelievable. I met with 8 representatives, senators, and in Congress, 8 of them in 2 days. So I was walking the halls a lot, and a lot of great feedback. And mental health is a priority with them, too.
I would imagine, even though they're sort of in the halls of Congress, I must imagine that it must touch a lot of them personally. I mean, everybody knows somebody that has some type of issue. It's like knowing somebody who has cancer. We all know somebody.
And the one thing I always tell people, if you don't know somebody, you do know somebody. Because, again, that's the one thing people don't want to talk about it. Everybody knows somebody. The statistics out there, 1 in 5 people have some kind of mental health illness in this year coming. I think it was 1.4 million people in 2017 attempted suicide. And that's just what's recorded, because the only way they get those recordings, the data,
So they
is
gotta
when
click
people
enough.
go into the hospital. So if someone attempted and didn't go to the hospital, it's not going to get recorded. It was 1.4 million, and I think the calculation is like 1 every 230 people
That's
in the country.
ridiculous.
42,000 take their lives. You could go into all the statistics. I don't like to talk about statistics. I like to talk about how we help people, and that's what I advocate for.
I was reading an article last week that I shared on Facebook. I think the last week they had like 3 New York police officers all within a week take their own lives.
Yeah. Especially ones that served from 9/11 is a big concern also. So any type of high-pressured, stressful job, first responders, military, attorneys, doctors, anybody that has a stressful job, and basically anybody in general, is susceptible to come down with depression and suicide.
Well, so that brings out an interesting topic. It's just something that I thought of. We had a call once on a case from the family called us. They were in Illinois, and I've talked about this before, but it just seems so relevant now that we're talking about the subject. So they called us from Illinois. They had a daughter who was 31 or 32. She was down here, posting all kinds of photos on Facebook and social media where she was holding an assault rifle and threatening to do violence. And the call came through as somebody who had a substance use disorder. She had an addiction issue. But when we sat and talked with the family, what we realized was that when she was 16, she had told her parents that when she was 14, 2 years earlier, she'd been sexually assaulted by a teacher at school. Mm-hmm. And the parents sent her to see a psychiatrist. And from that point on, she was medicated, and she went from medication to other strong pills to drugs. And of course, by the time she was 32, she had anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, and she was suicidal. And so, we did a guardianship down here, and I think we also did a march for that because that was the quickest way to get her basically, off the streets, as it were. But ultimately, after being Baker acted a couple of times and not being able to keep her in a facility down here that was able to cope with her because she was so far down the rabbit hole, they ended up getting her back to Illinois. And I actually did touch base with the family about a month ago, and they said she was doing a whole lot better. Mm-hmm. But it just seems that with a lot of these cases where we see substance use and mental health, we see at some point that there's like medication involved.
Yes.
And I don't know if the medication helps it or hurts it, but when I interviewed Dr. Ruth Swisser, who's a good friend of mine, if you know Ruth.
I don't.
She's a fellow Anglophile. She did a lot of her education there, but she's here now, and I said, this is what we see. Is there a relation between, say, kids who are getting medicated and some of these other things that happen later on in life? And she said, absolutely. Statistically, it's there. So, there's been some talk about, what we're doing with the veterans coming back. They come back with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And what do? We medicate them. Now we wonder why we have, all our, these veterans committing suicide.
Right.
So.
Well, one of the things I'll say about medication, and again, it's a personal thing with me, because a lot of times you'll go to psychologists, you go to doctors, and they'll just throw you on a medication. Now, do they know that medication is right? Now, for instance, if you have a broken arm, they'll take an x-ray, they'll look at the x-ray, they'll see it's broken, and they'll say, okay, we need to put you in a cast, or we need to put you into something, whatever. You could tell that. You can't tell with the brain what's the perfect medication for you. So a perfect example is my son. My son started coming down with, was getting depressed, anxiety. We brought him to his physician. His physician put him on Prozac. Okay, we're going by what the doctor says. So he's on Prozac, and then, later on, we start getting calls from his friends saying that they're worried because he's been texting certain things. So in that time, we called up his therapist and his psychiatrist. At that time, we got a psychiatrist for him. And all they wanted to do was just increase the medication. So we don't know what's going on. Okay, it's not my specialty. So we increased his medication. Following week, we get another call, another concern. The psychiatrist wanted to increase the medication again. Well, is that working or not working? The thing about it was, up in Massachusetts, I was on the board of directors for an organization called Samaritans, which is the crisis hotline. I called up and I spoke with the CEO, and I'm like, I need help. What can I do? He put me in touch with this woman who was a pretty world-renowned specialist in this area. She was kind enough to call me from Denver at like 8 o'clock on a Friday night. And I gave her a little bit of background. Now, obviously, she didn't want to diagnose him because she didn't see him. But when she told me that when she heard that he was on Prozac, it got her nervous. Because the one thing about Prozac is if you have any bit of bipolar, then the Prozac will actually do the opposite, and you'll become more suicidal at that point. So here are professionals giving my son more and more medication, and it's actually making him worse. When we had to put him into an inpatient at that point, they actually took him off of that and put him on a different medication that actually helped him. So people are throwing medication out. Recently, we had to take my son out of school and put him to the hospital homebound program because of his anxiety levels. And when I had to get the letter from the psychiatrist, she wanted to up his medication right away. And I'm like, why are we upping his medication? Well, because he has more anxiety. I said, the anxiety is caused from the school. We're taking him out of that environment now. Can we see how it works first before we just throw medication at him? Now, don't get me wrong. Medication is good, and it does help a lot of people. Right. So there are other great avenues to go. I met with somebody here in Boca you were talking about PTSD. There's an organization here that works with them on hyperbaric chambers. They found that a lot of veterans that have PTSD has a lot to do with sleep deprivation. And they've done studies, and they've had, I believe it's 30, I don't want to talk for them, but from my understanding, they had 30 veterans that are PTSD put in the hyperbaric chambers, and it's done wonders for them. There's another organization that's up in Orlando, and I want to find out more about them, but I understand it's called Diversion, where they put them back into their environment that they were in that caused the PTSD. And that seems to help a lot. I've been talking to people about that. So there are other avenues for people to go. Medication is necessary in a lot of cases, but there's also other things that can be done also. So let's talk about a couple of things. You had mentioned some, when you were up in D.C., there was some legislation I think that Ted Deutsch is working on? It wasn't Ted Deutsch, but it was a couple of other congressmen. For the opioid.
Yeah, can you shed a little light on that for us?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're trying to get sponsored up there, and I do forget the congressman that's sponsoring it, but it's to, there are, when someone's on opioids and we're trying to get them off of it and onto another, they typically put them on a different medication. But those medications, there's a waiting time to get to them. So doctor puts in a prescription, they have to fill out these forms and everything, special forms. We're trying to get that so you could do away with that gap in time and get the medication that's needed for these people right away. So it's a very important thing. Again, sometimes government and policies come into play when people need the help right there and then. And we're trying to get these laws changed.
So where do we see this going from here? Because right now we're sort of in the middle of to me it's like a national crisis. I mean, I know we hear about all these existential threats and ISIS and all these other groups you talk about. But to me, I think we're having our own civil war right here with opioids and mental illness. We do, and a lot of even and again, I don't want to get into this too deeply, but a lot of the crises that you see in here, they can relate or correlate to people that do have depression and suicide. So a lot of these unfortunate situations, there's a woman who does at Columbia University called the Lighthouse Project, and she did a study, and it was really interesting. I was watching it on CNN, where she shows proof that a lot of these shootings and stuff, the people that did it had signs of depression and suicide. I'm not giving them excuses. There's no reason for them doing what they did, but the point of it is that it probably could have been prevented if someone noticed some of the things that were going on with them. So there is a big crisis with other areas,
ISIS and everything like you mentioned, but there's a bigger crisis here in our own country, just trying to get the people the right help.
Yes, so before we went on the show, we sort of talked about the idea of resources, right? I mean, I like to think if you live here in Boca, you probably have some resources. If you don't have insurance, you hopefully have a few bucks tucked away. God forbid you need to go see a psychiatrist or a therapist of some kind. You have the ability to do so. But what do you do if you're, for the lack of a better, indigent, right? You just don't have the resources. You don't have insurance. You don't have enough money to, funds to spend $30,000-$40,000 a month on treatment.
Yeah.
So for those folks, what do they do if their kids are having these kinds of issues?
So and that's a tough topic right now, because that's one of my things that I'm advocating for. So as I mentioned to you, I am what's called assist certified. So I do interventions. So if someone is in crisis right there and suicidal at that point, I am trained to talk to them and try to help them to a place where not everybody needs to be Baker Act. If I could help someone get into a better place and then make a plan for them to go seek to get help, that might be a better solution for them. Problem is if they don't have the finances, where do they go? There is no places right now that I know of, and I've called up all over to find somebody to help these people. And that's a big issue that we got to address.
It's huge. So that sort of leads me on to another topic that we also talked about, which was like the whole idea of the Baker Act, right?
Right.
So you would say, well, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the whole idea of just sort of, let's Baker Act somebody, right? And I said, to me that can actually help us, right? Because when families come to us, we are trying to move as quick as we can, but when order does a guardianship, it could take 24 to 48 hours. If I do a Marchman Act, even if I move as quick as I possibly can, it could take me between 4 and 6 hours to get a court order and get somebody picked up. And even in that small window, I mean, tragedy can happen. And I can tell you that it has happened. I have had that call, and I just physically couldn't move quick enough. So for me, if a Baker Act gets initiated, it's a Band-Aid over a situation where there probably needs to be major surgery, but at least I know the person's safe, they're not using, and I know where they are. So that I can get a court order and say, Judge, this person right now is sitting in XYZ, they could be sitting in South County Baker Act receiving facility. As soon as they're done, I want law enforcement to take them to wherever they need to be taken to. So, I mean, I think the Baker Act can help. It just, I get these calls where parents say, listen, I called the police because I wanted to at least have my child Baker Acted so that they were stabilized, and then I get these other calls where they say, I can't believe it. I called the police for a little help, and the first thing he did was Baker Act.
Yeah. So I have a problem with the Baker Act in that respect. The Baker Act is phenomenal and definitely needs to be used when appropriate, and that's why I think the interventions are good. And I'd love to talk to you more about how we could help with the Baker Act. As I mentioned, I know people that have Baker Act their kids. From my understanding, it goes in 72 hours, and then when they come out, it's 72 hours they can only hold them for, and then they let them,
as a general rule.
Go. Right. So when they come out, where do they go? It's going to be the same thing. You're still unstable, even 72 hours later. You're still in crisis, and again, there's no help for you at that point. Now, the only thing that does, in my opinion, and I've heard it from other people that have Baker Act their kids, is they Baker Act them. Now what happens is they don't want to confide in anybody anymore because they think they're just going to be Baker Act again. And yes, Baker Acting is essential in a lot of cases. Look, if someone's, got a weapon in their hand, or if someone I can't help at that point, and I know I can't help them any further, then yes, I'm going to Baker Act them. If they have a weapon in their hand, I'm not going in there and call 911 right away. But, again, if I do Baker Act everybody and they go in, are they going to open up to me again when I go down the road if they need the help again? And I'd rather be a confidant to somebody that they know they could talk to, and I'm here to help them and listen. Look, a lot of these people, most of the people I talk to, you don't even have to say anything to them. They just want somebody to listen to you. They feel like they're alone, that there's nobody out there that understands them. And I'm here to say, I understand. I've been through it. I've had my own personal issues. I've had personal issues with family, and I'm here just to listen, and I care. And if that's what people want to show, that you have a passion for them, and you're going to be there if they call you. So a lot of times the Baker Act might not be necessary, but I don't want to say it's never necessary. There's always a place for it.
Yeah, so I read another article I read and I shared was, I can't remember which police department it is, but now, I'd be up north somewhere. They're basically mandating that every single police officer has to have crisis intervention training, so that when they get called to the scene and somebody is having, has had a break, right, they know how to handle it, as opposed to, grab a hold of the person, throw them to the ground, cuff them, and take them to the nearest receiving facility.
Yeah.
Worse.
That's something that's really important. Now, I think, first of all, first responders should. Actually, I just heard something on TV today that I think they're doing it with also EMT. But anyway, so it's very important for first responders, police, firemen, anybody that's dealing with public.
Those guys are on the front line. And girls.
Also teachers. Teachers, now I believe there's a bill in right now for mandatory mental health training by teachers. We need that nationally. This is something that's really important. One of the things I say to everybody is, parents, you get to see your kids and everything, but teachers see kids more than parents do sometimes, especially during the school year. They're the frontline people. They don't have to be an interventionist. They don't have to call the parent and say, I think your kid's depressed. There's somebody at each school, a counselor, that handles that. But the teacher's going to see more of how a kid's acting in class. Are they doing their homework? Have they always been a straight A student, or are they getting Fs now? Are they showing up late? Are they tired when they get to school? That's a big one too. If someone's always sleeping when they get into class, maybe there's an issue if they haven't done that before, because maybe they're not sleeping. One of the things I tell people too is, even, teachers are mandatory to take physical abuse training. But again, that could be, unless it's on the face of physical abuse, it could be hidden. You can't hide what's going on in your head a lot of times. And that's something that's got to be picked up. And I think teachers need it. And I'll take one step further. I think coaches need it. I think coaches are a big problem also with the way kids are, with the competitiveness that's going out there. And you could beat a kid down real easy. So, and that's one of the things I did up in Massachusetts. I started a program called the Sudbury Ravens in honor of my daughter, where I combined suicide prevention with youth baseball. And we just basically put the program together to let kids know, if you make an error, that's a good thing. If you strike out, that's a good thing. But it's a good thing only if you reflect on why it happened and think about why it happened, so it won't happen again, or that's the way you improve yourself. That's a life lesson. So I think, and that's something I haven't brought up before, but I think coaches need it also.
I love it. So I know that you're starting a radio show, right?
Yes, I am.
So I can't wait to be a guest on that show.
Yes. You will be one of the first guests.
I can't
Absolutely. It's going to be on iHeartRadio on WJNO on 1290 AM on Saturdays at 12 o'clock. And again, it's going to be a show just on mental health, suicide prevention awareness, and it's going to be a positive show. I don't want to talk about statistics. I don't want to talk about the reason why people do things. I want to talk about how we could get help, how to get the stigma out of this. The stigma's got, if you don't mind, I got to tell one quick thing.
Please.
Look at what happened with AIDS and HIV. AIDS and HIV, I remember when I was working back in the late 80s, 90s, it was a stigma that if someone had AIDS and you walked past them, that you would catch it. And then all of a sudden, all the fundraising came out, a lot of things happened. Magic Johnson comes down with HIV. It was a big push in this country to get the things right and really put an end to HIV and AIDS. And it's happened. Now, it's still a concern. I'm not putting it, in the back burner or anything. It's a great thing that we've gotten this far. But, you can have HIV undetectable now. You could live a normal life. And everybody knows I could go up and shake your hand and give you a hug if you have HIV or AIDS. And that's what is happening with that. I have a lot of family members that have breast cancer. Again, the same thing. A lot of awareness, a lot of things, a lot of research has been done on it because of this. And thank God now that's been done. It's a great thing that it's been done. A lot of money's been put towards it because now I have family members that are able to survive and they're still in pain. They're still going through a lot of stuff. But again, they're able to make it through it. Suicide's not that point yet. And that's my whole point about 40 years ago in 1981 when that article came out. Things haven't changed. And that's why we need to get the message out. That's what my show's about.
I never really thought about it. So, I mean, really, we're sort of, it's almost like the mental health, I guess, epidemic. It's a bit like what the AIDS crisis was back in the early 80s, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it took something like Magic coming out and saying, I'm HIV positive.
It took a lot of people. I mean, you see Elton John was a big influence in it. You know, remember Live Aid?
Yep.
Remember those concerts that went on? They were phenomenal. I was there. And it was just a great thing. And thank God they did that. Because I don't know where it would have been right now if they didn't put the money into it in the research. So I'm not saying that we stopped all that now, but we need to put the same effort into suicide and mental health. I will say one other thing on that. You know, when people have cancer, they have cancer, and it's a horrible thing. And you know, my father passed by cancer. You know, I have a lot of of that in my family, so it's affecting me too. But when you have, and diabetes is diabetes, but when you have mental health, it crosses the whole plane. So people that have cancer have mental health issues. People that have diabetes have mental health issues. My wife is a geriatric nurse, mental health issues, autism, whatever the area is of illness, mental health goes on top of it. Not only for the person that has it, but their family members too. And there's depression that goes along with it. So that's why it's widespread. And I'll give you one other statistic that I don't like to talk about, but do you know that depression, mental health, is the number one disability in the world? In the world. It's the reason why more people go onto disability and have to take off from work than anything else in the world.
So if only for financial reasons, it's costing us a fortune not to treat these people.
Oh, and that's kind of funny too, because when we go up to D.C., we got to talk
Politicians
about
understand dollars and
cents. So it's like, $90 billion or whatever the numbers are. It's a hefty number that costs the public and costs people individually, and it costs the government a lot of money. I mean, all the people that do have these mental health that have to go to the hospital and can't afford to, who picks up the tab? So, Medicaid and everything else, the government's paying. Well, we're paying for it, but the government,
is
comes
spending
out of
our
budget.
money for it.
Yeah. So this is money that can be saved if you want to talk dollars and cents. I hate talking dollars and cents when it comes to mental health, but I guess you have to when you talk to politicians sometimes.
So if somebody watches the show and because I'm sure people are going to watch this with like the light bulb's going to go off and realize they're not alone. Right,
and that's the whole message.
So how do they get help? Where can they go? I mean, other than reaching out to you, and we're going to give out your contact information anyway.
Absolutely.
And us, I mean, I know you said there's 211, right?
So in this 211, which is phenomenal, an organization, and it's not just crisis hotline. They help with everything. Anybody needs help, anybody could call them. They're going to help them, put them in the right direction. So 211, there's the 211 that goes from, I believe it's Boca up to the Treasure Coast, and then there's the Broward 211. They could call that. 911 is always a great source. There's also the crisis hotline, the national one, which is 1-800-273-TALK. You could call up organizations like the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Especially if you lost someone, there are groups that we have. If you're in a school, we have programs to bring to the schools to help teachers be aware of what's going on and what to do in this situation. Law enforcement, we do the same thing. First responders, even psychologists and psychiatrists. A lot of them or that don't specialize in this field also could use our services in that. There are other avenues. If you do have someone that you are worried about, there's actually a mobile unit that can go to the person, and it's in Broward and in Palm Beach. You call up 911, they could send it out, and they'll evaluate you and see if you need to be Baker Act or
So you call 911 and you say, can you send out the mobile unit?
Yeah, you talk to them. I would call up like 211. You could call up and they could give you the information for that too. NAMI is a great one. There's the Fork Center here in Boca.
Yep.
Which is a great
Phenomenal.
source.
And that's really for people who don't have a ton of dough.
Right. And Jewish Family Services.
Yep. I'm on the board there. So.
And I'm actually going to be a volunteer with them. They're putting my paperwork now, but I'm going to be a first aid, mental health first aid
Have you
with
met
them.
Sharon yet? Sharon Burns Carter?
Sharon is awesome.
Isn't she amazing?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of great people. I'll tell
Yep.
you one thing. The one thing you'll find about the people in this industry, they all care. They're all there. When they meet you, they're going to give you a hug. They really want to help. And that's the one thing people got to understand. We're here to help. So we have an ear open. Call us. And, whatever time it is, that's what it's about.
So how do folks get a hold of you? If they have questions, they just want information, resources?
So there's a couple ways you get a hold of me. If you want to call me on my cell number, which is 561 345-7456. I'm sorry, 325-7456. So that's one way. My other cell number is 781-879-8414. That's my Massachusetts number. Or you could email me, and the email address is realconvo1290.
Real,
R-E-A-L, convo, C-O-N-V, 1290 at gmail.com. Any way you could text me, you could call me, however I can
and
help.
if they don't remember any of that stuff, they can reach out to me as well.
Absolutely.
So, folks, thank you for tuning into another edition of The Journey. Don't forget to post comments and questions on the show. We're on YouTube. We're going to be on other social media platforms as soon as we get approved. LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and obviously our website, drugandalcoholattorneys.com. If you have any questions, 561-419-6095, or email mark@drugandalcoholattorneys.com. And Alan, well, I got to tell you something. For a second, I thought I was going to lose it, because I can't believe how, we met you. You're just like this ball of fire and passion, and I'm like, the tragedy, the things that have come down the pipe for you. I don't know how you got out of bed, at least for the first year. I really don't.
First year was very tough. Very tough. Drive to work, cry my eyes out, going into work, get into work, stay in the office, and just sit there with the glasses on, sunglasses, and that was it. But, I realized that I wasn't alone, and that there was stuff to do to help other people. And, unfortunately, tragedy happens, but, you just can't sit down and not do anything about it. So I'm trying to help other people.
So thanks for coming in to share your story. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.